there is probably not one single person in this world who can create a pencil end
Mm,
to end, from like cutting down the tree to like
yeah.
making the lead. There's like a lot of parts, and I'm not familiar with them, but
Mm,
I can imagine that like everyone does their own part. And the reason that someone made a pencil is because like all these other people have created something before him, that led up to this discovery slash invention of the pencil.
this is podcast 2 with Alan Huang. I've known Alan since middle school, back when we played Capture the Flag at church and going to all the church meetings. We both went to Rutgers, and it's there I think I got to know Alan a bit better. He helped me a lot in math. We might talk about that later. And so without further ado, Alan, welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here. Glad to be able to express my thoughts on your podcast.
Thanks, Alan. So I still don't know quite how to start a podcast. So you actually helped me out because before we started this podcast, you sent me a text, and the text was about the 80-20 rule, right? So where have you heard of 80-20 rule?
So I think it's a pretty well-known phenomenon. Actually, I think you were the one who, not, I guess I can't say introduced it to me, but it's like, I think you're kind of big on the 80-20 rule, so you've mentioned it
Mm,
a few times. And so like it's become more clear in my mind because of that. But I think I'm sure our listeners have probably also heard of the 80-20 rule. But I guess I'll give a quick introduction
mm,
or summary of what it is, which states that for any distribution, for example, you can think of the distribution of wealth. You have roughly that 80% of the wealth comes from 20% of the population. And, this can be for a multitude of things. This can be for, wealth across a country. It can be for revenue for some company. And the list goes on. And so,
it's interesting you said it came from me because I actually have two experiences with this. One is since I'm a stats major, right, where we cover different distributions, and for some reason we don't include Pareto because I don't think it's as simple as like normal. Well, normal has a complex function to it, right, with like
mhm.
E, pi, and all that. But Pareto, like for some reason we don't cover it. We cover binomial, we cover geometric, even hypergeometric, but no Pareto. I felt Pareto was more of, in terms of learning history, I came across it through the person Pareto, and he was the Italian, I guess, is it scientist or statistician? I guess I don't know what they were back in those days, but he figured he measured the land of Italy and discovered that 80% of the land of Italy was owned by 20% of the people. Now that's like a huge wow to me because like it's a distribution on inequality really. And so that's what I love when stats mix with history. That's what really catches my attention. But then in work, like Joanna always talks about 80-20 rule when it comes to business. And so I guess I kind of knew there was a business side to it, but I didn't quite like that wasn't my initial area of interest. That was just this new thing. The text you sent was on how not to apply quickly to every phenomenon you see, right? Do you want to go into a little more into that?
Yeah. I think the first thing I want to mention is that, like, given that it's so famous of a rule, you think that it'd be pretty widely applicable. And so I guess like you would imagine that it would be applicable in business, in land distribution in Italy, as you mentioned,
Mm,
and likely in a variety of other places. And then the text I sent you was because I was reading some forum, and this, in this forum, the context was, it's kind of a weird context, but basically the commenter said that, pretty much, I'll put it like very directly, 80
yeah.
20 rule is a fluke. Basically, he said there's nothing special about these two numbers, 80 and 20, that that are anything special.
Mm,
He said that, for any number between 0 and 50, you can have that 100 minus that number, for example, let's use 30 as an example, you can say 70% of
Mm,
this thingy is owned by 30% of the population.
right.
Or, it could be like 60-40,
Mm,
or 50-50, or even 99-1. And so basically his idea was that, like, why do we use 80-20? What's special about 80-20 when
mm,
there are distributions that might have like a 70-30 rule or 75-25. So that was the point of his distribution. And that actually did get me thinking. So I thought that was pretty interesting.
So I actually don't know the answer to that. But I always knew it as Pareto distribution. I only knew it as 80-20 because of business. I don't know if it's a business thing specifically, where 80% of sales comes from 20% of clients, which is the case where I work. Of
Hmm.
course, it's not perfectly 80-20, right? If there's some years where it's 79-21, is it? And so it differs from year to year. And of course, it's not exact, but I wonder that too, 80-20.
I was going to say that actually, I do feel that I have like a little bit of intuition why 80-20, or at least somewhere in that ballpark, might be more accurate than something like way further out, maybe like 60-40 or 55-45. I guess there are two aspects here. One, I definitely is that, like, 80-20 is catchy. Let's say that like 70, let's say, like, purely hypothetically, for the sake of example, that 79-21 was the most common rule.
Uh-huh.
That's never going to be like a rule, quote
You're
unquote, that we
right.
use. Like,
It's not
no one's going to
catchy.
say that, like, oh, hey, the like
79,
79-21 rule.
21%. Right.
And it's like that's one aspect. The
What if what
other,
what about 70-30?
70-30, yeah, so that's like when it gets more like extreme out there. And
Oh,
I
okay,
think like
okay. Understood.
the reason why like 80-20 is generally more common, I should say, than something like 60-40, is because that as we get to like 60-40, 50-50, it becomes a lot flatter of a
Right.
distribution. And so, to give an example, let's consider the 50-50 rule. Let's say 50% of the population, the top 50% of the population owns 50% of the wealth. If
Uh-huh.
we think specifically about what that means, we realize that that just means everybody owns the exact same amount of money. Because if
Mm,
one single person owned like a single dollar more than somebody else, then they'd be part of the top 50%. And the
mm,
person who owned $1 less would be part of the bottom 50%. And in that case, the top 50% would own like a tiny bit more because that one person owns like an extra dollar. So
huh.
essentially, if we say the top 50% of the population owns 50% of the wealth, we're talking about an extreme, just like a uniform distribution. Everybody owns
Mm,
the exact same amount of stuff. There's no deviation whatsoever. And so based on that, you can kind of start to imagine or understand why like a 50-50 rule would be like, it's just not, doesn't appear so often because there's always fluctuations.
what was that last part that you said? 50-50, it's
Oh, because
just
that only exists if we have like a completely flat distribution. And when I say
right.
flat, I mean like everybody owns the exact same amount of money.
So,
Or like for land, like everybody owns the exact same amount of land.
right. And so that doesn't usually happen in society, right?
Yeah,
And
that.
so one of the things I was interested in is this measure of inequality, right? There's a lot of talk about equity these days. And so I guess true equity would be the 50-50 rule, right?
Mhm,
Everyone owns like if you're top 50%, bottom 50%, it doesn't matter because everyone owns
exactly.
50%, right?
Yes.
So when does it become unequal in a way, right? Is 80-20 the sweet spot for like inequality where if you go above 80-20, things start becoming drastically unequal. And then if you go below that, you start trending towards equity, but for some reason society trends towards 80-20. Do you think there's something like is it something natural with society to trend towards that?
I do think so. And I think it's not only society, it's just the way that I guess inequality or like deviations are structured. And actually that was kind of my next point, which is that like, I think the 80-20 rule speaks more to how much like inequality or deviation from the uniform distribution there is in many things, wealth distribution, land distribution, business, etc. I did like a tiny bit of research on what it is. And actually the interesting thing is that I found a lot of sources that relate it to Benford's law. Do you remember that?
It's
I
something
know
with one, right?
it tells you the like distribution of things that start with a 1, start with a 2, start with a 3. So distributions which follow Benford's law also happen to follow this 80-20 rule.
Huh.
So if you think of like, the amount of wealth in this world, you plot everybody whose net worth starts with a 1, starts with a 2, starts with a 3. If that follow Benford's law, that should also follow the 80-20 rule. And I found that pretty interesting.
Do you know 80-20 is, it's not exactly in the Bible, but you know the story of the talents, how the person had 5 talents, there's a person with 10 talents, and then there's one with 1 talent, right? And then the 10 talent got 10 more talents, right? And the person with 5 talents got 5 more, but the person with 1 got that one taken away, right? So is that an example of like, the more you have, the more you'll get. Do you think that this is naturally built into society somehow, that, even if we try to get things to equalize, or society is bound to be unequal or follow this distribution?
I think there's definitely that more, what do I call it? I want to call it like a philosophical takeaway, or a more because there are 2 parts, right? There's like the math part of like why this exists,
Yeah,
and then there's like the more
exactly.
human part of like why as like humans we tend to have it this way. And I think the like human part, or the more like philosophical part, if that's a good name for it, is that we probably do like trend towards this type of inequality. Is that like, if if you have something, you want more, and if you don't have a lot, you can't get more even if you try. I think that's kind of the informal takeaway.
I guess this goes into another topic. The stats we created are this Pareto distribution. It's something that comes from statistics or measurement, right? Math. But what it measures is something that's in society. It's just out there in the world, right? Maybe it's land, maybe it's income, maybe it's crime. I don't know what it is. It's almost like we've discovered like a pattern that uses a system we invented. Is math out there in nature, or is it something that we invented?
Yeah, I think that's definitely a good question. I think for any phenomenon, there is kind of an underlying ground truth that is independent of like whatever we humans come up with. To use the inequality as a rule, as an example, I think the ground truth is that like what how much you're able to make is your potential to make money is always somewhat proportional to how much you already have. And what I mean by that is, if you're like a billionaire, getting another $1 million likely is not very difficult.
Right. You can even see that in interest.
Exactly. Yeah. If you're like, a middle class citizen, then it's like, oh man, I have to work super, 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 super hard to get that $1 million.
And if you were bottom,
if
lower
you're
class,
bottom, if you're lower class
you have to work
poverty,
super, super.
that's like borderline not possible. And so I think the underlying mathematical concept of this is that you have like E is supposed to be the like natural growth constant. And the fact that in that formula, like PE to the RT, which
Yes.
Sure, like those who have done math, differential equations, you see like E everywhere. You see like E being raised to some power.
When was the
Um,
first time you saw E? Do you remember?
High
You want to
school or
think about
middle
that?
school?
I'll tell you where when I first saw it.
Yeah.
I first saw it in 10th grade in math analysis. We were doing interests.
Hmm.
And then you could do interest by year, right?
Hmm.
And then interest by semi-annual, so like 2 times every year, and then by
Hmm.
month, by week, by day, and then by second, right? And as that limit goes to infinity, the limit of 1 plus 1 over n to the nth power is equal to e. That was the first time I saw that number. I don't know, when did you first see it?
I, I I would like to say probably also high school. Maybe I've encountered it once or twice in middle school, but definitely high school was when I started working with it the most.
Hmm,
Um,
calculus.
yeah. But I think it's like that's the type of fundamental truth that's already out there, which is that like the informal takeaway of this is that the more you have, the easier it is to get. Basically, your earning potential is proportional to whatever you already have.
Mm,
And I think that's like the very, very, very like underlying ground truth that maybe causes a lot of these phenomenon to occur. And then as we humans observe like these phenomena around us, we're able to kind of reconstruct that and come up with like whatever math is in order to model that. But the fundamental truth is like already there, and we kind of just model it. That's kind of like my viewpoint on math.
ah, I see. So pi is already out there, e is already out there, and we just, I guess, created a system that models what's out there. So like I think for physics, right? For like the solar system, we know
Mhm.
that planets move in orbits, and it's elliptical, right? Not
Mhm.
circular orbits, elliptical orbits, right? And we could use physics to model that, or we could model gravity, right? The gravitational force. We could model all these different types of forces, but these are like intergalactic scale, right? Big scale. But then as we get smaller and smaller, it's like quantum level. We can't actually we model it, but there's things like Heisenberg uncertainty principle, and then I think the core of quantum mechanics is like we don't know where like this electron will be or whatnot. And so it almost seems like large scale wise, we figured out a system. We've created a model. We can model the, I guess, macro
Mhm.
objects, but like micro wise, is it our system falls short, or like or I guess that's where the disconnect of math and reality comes in.
Hmm. Yeah, on a very micro level, I feel like when you get to Heisenberg uncertainty principle, when you talk about quantum mechanics, the superpositions and the kind of the non-determinism of this
Mm.
world, then that's probably where it gets into like a very gray area. To be honest,
Do
I
you
don't
think
have like. Mhm.
it's okay? It's okay. I don't know anything either, you know? So do you think that things keep dividing? Like there's no like, you know how we discovered the atom? We thought that was the building block, right? And then from atoms we get can even get smaller protons, neutrons, electrons. And then now even electrons, I think there's quarks, right?
Mhm.
That's the extent of my knowledge. I don't know anything smaller than that. But do you think things will keep getting smaller, 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 or is there a finite limit to things in reality?
I believe that there are probably like, they'll get smaller and smaller and smaller. I know like we've been looking for a lot of these very, very like small particles. There's one that was I don't know if you've heard of it, the Higgs boson,
Boson?
boson or something. The one thing that kind of made a lot of noise when like it was found, because it was supposed to be like a very special
Mm,
particle in
right.
some way, but I don't know. I think it's like it never will keep. It'll never like stop. I
Oh,
don't think there's like a truly fundamental building block.
huh. So that actually would go well with math, because math we think of infinity, right, with limits. But
Mhm.
if in reality we had a stopping point, like this is the smallest unit, like math, we can go like 10 to the negative whatever power, right? But let's say that like 10 to the negative 50 was the smallest thing in existence. You can't go smaller. Do you think that would like crack our math system or not quite?
I think like so there is actually like a technically smallest length that scientists have come up with called the Planck length.
Oh,
I don't know if
I
you've
didn't know
heard of
that.
it. It's ridiculously tiny, and how they came up with that is beyond me, because we don't we don't know of any particle or anything even close to the scale of that length. They kind of just said that like, oh, this is the smallest length.
Mm,
um but with that said, I think math is flexible. Like numbers are flexible. They kind of can be used to model anything. It's just that like the models themselves might get more and more complicated as the behaviors that you're trying to model become more and more complicated. So uh, definitely believe in the potential of math to be able to model whatever it is you want to model. But
so
it's the
so on
ability of
this,
humans to come up with
mm,
that.
on to come up with a model. But with respect to models, like to my understanding of quantum mechanics models, is that it actually doesn't model reality. It's a probability model of what's likely to happen. So that's different than I guess momentum or like F equals ma,
Mhm.
right? We model that, we pretty much expect things to come out that way. But with quantum, if it's a probability model, it doesn't actually model reality, but more so the likelihood or expectation that it will be this way, right? So once we get into probability models, does that depart then from representing reality as is to like more like predictive, just predicting because we just don't know?
So I want to to answer that. I kind of want to throw another curveball at you,
Sure. Okay.
which is that the assumption right now is that because we're predicting some probability distribution of where let's say this one electron is,
Mm,
or this quantum particle, the assumption is that we are not modeling reality 100% accurately. Like there
hmm.
is some error. It's like it could be here, it could be there, and
Right.
therefore there's something flawed or inaccurate about the model. But I think the more you get into quantum, and I haven't gotten into quantum very much, but
Yeah.
the ground truth is that this model is reality. There is no such this this electron is here or this electron is there. It is only a probability distribution, and how that works actually kind of blows my mind also. I kind of I'm very Einsteinian in the sense that he believed in a deterministic world, and I kind of it's very easy to believe in that, and I kind of still believe in that until I am able to kind of understand how in this in this world today that it seemingly is deterministic.
Deterministic.
It's if
Uh-huh.
this is here, it's here, and that's that. It
That's
can't be
that.
50% here, 50% there. But
Right. Schrodinger's cat, right?
yeah, I think as you get into quantum, it's not that the models are flawed. It's that reality itself is this way, and that's the reason why we model it as such.
Huh. So reality is probabilistic rather than deterministic. I feel I'm still more of a deterministic person too. I can't shift my mind to how something can be and not be at the same time, like a physical object at least. I don't know. So would you say you're still then deterministic and trying to understand the probabilistic
I
side of
would
things?
I would say, yeah, actually that's physics is probably one of the interests of mine, and definitely if I do uh, pursue further study in some field, physics will be up there, and that's a lot of it is due to the fact that I kind of want to be able to wrap my mind around why this
Reality.
is why they came up with this, because there have been a lot of experiments and such done, and it's a relatively accepted um fact, at least in the physics
Hmm.
scientific community, that like this is reality. And so that, it leads me to believe that like there must be like, reasons, experiments done that can prove this. Um,
Right.
but for now, because I don't understand any of that. So I live with the view that like the world is, deterministic. Like this is this
Mm,
and
mm.
that is that.
You were kind of talking about history of like kind of how far we come. I guess science-wise, maybe Enlightenment, we kicked off like an understanding with Newton, right? Or at least atomic stuff. I thought it was some school teacher, right? English school teacher, and he thought of atoms as marbles,
Mhm.
right? And that's how he taught it. And then we went to like plum pudding model, and then what's another model? And then it planetary model, right, of the electron. I think I skipped some. Maybe the gold foil experiment showing that atoms have a nucleus, and it's not just a plum pudding. But then as we progress, I guess you could say each is progression towards how our world truly operates. And I guess even today, I guess we don't understand, but do you think scientists understand um, the reality, or they're still trying to pinpoint that and or might not even have grasped it yet?
um, I think it's in order to have a full end-to-end understanding of anything is ridiculously tricky to say the
Mm-hmm.
least.
Right.
And I guess you're kind of leading into this the question of like, when we make a discovery or we like know something, is it just me who has come up with this discovery? I know everything end to end, or is that like I've taken some like borrowed knowledge from other people?
Discovery, is it something individual? It comes to you as an aha and a eureka moment, or is it the result of building on all the progress that came before, or is it mixture of both in a way?
Yeah. So I think that I still believe that it's like a very collective process. I think
Hmm.
back when we were at Clayton's place,
Yeah.
that was one of our topics of discussion.
Mm.
Um, and that was my belief then. And then there was this podcast that I sent you. Just curious, did you listen to any portion of it?
I listened to the whole thing. Yeah.
Oh, you listened
So,
to the whole thing?
yep. Yeah.
Oh,
So you could
nice.
talk about it, and I will talk back. Yeah.
So I remember that like,
Oh, just to be clear to everyone on internet, the podcast we listened to was a Strachey's lecture featuring Matt Ridley. And Alan actually talked. Well, I guess Alan will go into it, but his view on how discovery is a collective progress, I actually don't. I disagree with that. I always feel that discovery is more individual. So Alan, go for it.
yeah, so I guess before diving directly into this problem,
Mm,
this question, I want to talk a little bit about like what you said of what like whether one person can have all the knowledge. And I think that like you can only have knowledge that's borrowed from somewhere else or from
true.
those who came before you. So
Right.
for the actually the example in that other podcast that we were talking about, they
Mm,
gave the example of like a pencil of how like there's probably not one single person in this world who can create a pencil end
mm,
to end from like cutting down the tree to like
yeah.
making the lead. There's like a lot of parts and I'm not familiar with them, but
Mm,
I can imagine that like everyone does their own part, and the reason that someone made a pencil is because like all these other people have created something before him that led up to this discovery slash invention of the pencil. So that's on a general level, that's what I believe.
hmm. For me, then I guess the example I think of is actually back to the atom. Right.
Mhm.
When we first, I remember the English school teacher's name. His name was John Dalton, right? He thought of atoms as marbles, right? And so he had to make that shift from thinking the, of matter as atoms, right? I don't know what they thought of it as before, right?
Mhm.
But then clearly there was another scientist, right? You have, I think it maybe, I don't think it was it J.J. Thomson. He thought of the plum pudding model, right? And that was the understanding of atoms at that time. But then scientists before him or before him, they wouldn't have thought of it that way. You know, he had to shift that, make that paradigm shift, right?
Mhm.
And then even Einstein, right? I guess I don't know exactly what he did, even though we say like he's the smartest man ever. But like he has also have brought in a paradigm shift, right? Maybe
Mhm.
there were other scientists like Faraday or I don't know who else contributed to Einstein's thing, but um, I think that there's still an individual who kind of shifts or makes a major breakthrough. And if you don't have that breakthrough, you can't have the next stage. You know what I mean? I'm not saying that one person does everything. You know,
Mhm.
I think the example is given of the internet, in which like it does fall into my example of how the government started it up. I think it was like AlphaNet or something before, but then it was up to like people like Steve Jobs and those pioneers in the 1980s with the computer who really made it like something we have today, right? So I don't think it's one person does it, but I think one person needs to spark it, otherwise it wouldn't happen.
I see. So I think it's probably not a question of like black or white, but it's a question of like scale, or it's like on this spectrum, how
Hmm.
much further does this one person like jump us? Does this paradigm shift? Like if the person who is it that you said who discovered the like atom model?
Oh, John Dalton and J.J. Thompson.
John Dalton, if they didn't come along, would it be that progress would be behind by 1 year, 10 years, 100 years,
Mm,
or maybe we wouldn't even know about the atom today? And
right.
so I think that becomes the question. And like I think like there's probably not like a perfect answer to this, but in my opinion, it's not actually very long. It's certainly not 100 years. Let's say, let's first start with today. There's zero chance, I believe, that like if they didn't come along, we wouldn't think of the atom today, because I feel that like in order to make these stretches in concepts and coming up with these new paradigms, you have to have the underlying tools behind it. Like if you're like in the medieval times, even if you think of this idea of the atom, it doesn't mean anything to you, because you don't have like the scientific tools available to either like support your hypothesis,
Right.
come up with any experiment that is in some relation to your hypothesis. um, and so it's all speculation at that point. But at a certain point, once microscopes get better, once we can observe smaller things, um,
Technology
yeah, once
improves and
that
catches up.
infrastructure and technology catches up and gets to a certain point, it just becomes easier to make that mental jump. And so I think that like if John Dalton wasn't here, then perhaps very shortly in the future, someone else would have had the same idea.
So let's use another example. So the example of smartphones,
Mhm,
right? Or the touchscreen phones, right? Before
mhm,
then it was I think it was Steve Jobs who first pioneered it, right? With the iPhone.
mhm.
And so my personal feeling is without Steve Jobs, we wouldn't have touchscreen phones. But I think what you believe is that it might not have come out like the iPhone, but some sort of product would have eventually been created that involves fingers to activate, right? Is that your kind of what you believe?
Yes, I believe that if Steve Jobs didn't come along, then a few years later, someone else would have come along and then came up with I can almost say the same exact thing as
Really?
Steve Jobs, the
Okay.
touch screen. Yeah.
I always felt that things would have went differently because at that time Apple was trending towards the Newton, right? So that was the one where you needed a pen to click
Mhm,
on it, and I think they kicked Jobs out of the program of the company because he wanted to do the iPhone. And so I don't know if Jobs like didn't persevere on whether we would we would be using phones with pens at this point. Like I always felt that trends were started by a person and then people capitalized or piggybacked on it, right? Which kind of goes along with you about how progress isn't one person but collective. But I always felt that without certain people, the world might be a little, but we wouldn't know, right? This is all
mhm.
speculation. And so I guess the individual and collective debate keeps going. But I guess the other thing is, what about like organizations funding like scientific projects or advancement. I think in the podcast it said that empires and big companies are bad at innovation. So what do you think about that?
Um, I think so. So companies and innovate and big corporations are bad at innovation. Um, I
Do you
think
think they
that
have an incentive to innovate?
I think it's not that they're bad at innovation. It's more so that it's a little bit hard to change the establishment. If
Mm,
a bigger a company is, the more inertia that it has to go the same direction that it's already going, and to make
yes,
any tiny change, then that's something that like takes a lot of effort.
right. Agree. And okay, and so the big companies would or empires would trend towards a certain direction, right? And wouldn't and they don't really have the incentive, I guess, to break the status quo or introduce a new product. And so they're kind of that like slumbering giant just walking forward in that direction. Do you think that's the world we live in today with these big companies?
Um, for sure, I think it's just a natural phenomenon. It's something that as things get bigger, changes harder. You see this in physics also. You have like a massive like
Yes,
object. If it's
right.
going at like 10 miles per hour, it's like much harder to get it to change direction than if you have
Or
this
even to
tiny
stop.
tiny ball. Yeah, or to stop it,
Right, right.
to give any change, whether it's to speed it up, stop it, make it change direction. Um,
Mm,
any single change is harder. And I think that's the same for like big companies today, like whether you want to accelerate a big company's growth versus you want a big company to completely change direction, or you want to stop a big company in its tracks, it's much harder to do that. Just by nature, due to the fact that it's so big, and in order to stop it or change its tracks, have to
right.
like kind of go into all the parts and then convince these people to do this, and it's just a much harder job.
So let's use the big companies today as an example, right? So Amazon, right? Amazon was started by Jeff Bezos.
Mhm.
No Amazon existed before then, right? He came up with the idea on a road trip across the US, I think, and then he got to Seattle and then started the company there.
Mhm.
And then Microsoft, that was started by Bill Gates, I think, right? Or
Mhm.
did Microsoft exist back then before
I
Gates?
I'm pretty sure it was yeah, Bill Gates.
Bill Gates that did it, right? And
Mhm.
so he also went in and he had to and he was an entrepreneur, right? I guess these were all startups when they did it, right? And then Google, I think it was done at a college or university, maybe Berkeley. And then they were trying to find out like they were trying to find like scholarly articles, like a search engine that could find scholarly articles. And then everyone started using it. And then it quickly grew into what we knew today. But like all these things were startups, right? They were
Mhm.
small companies 20, 30 years ago. Now though we still hear the term startups, right? But I feel that aren't all the startups just trying to be bought by these big companies rather than become big companies themselves? Or do you not feel that? You still think that some people want to there are Jeff Bezos and Bill Gates in our generation. We just don't know. Or
I
what do you
believe
think?
very strongly actually that we just don't know, and I think there's
Hmm.
a little bit of, what's that called? It's like success bias. Do you know the term where like, for example, like if a successful celebrity says all you have to do is follow your dreams, there's some bias in that because you
Right.
only hear of those who have succeeded and are telling you that. What about the 99% who have followed their dreams and
And
then ended up on the
didn't.
streets or something, you
Exactly.
know?
Right.
And so I don't know what that's called. I'll just call it success bias for now. And I think the same is true for these big companies where like obviously there's like Microsoft, there's Amazon, there's Google, there's all these big companies who are successful now. But what you don't hear about is the like thousands, hundreds of thousands of startups back then who, they were trying to also like either make it big or get bought out by some other company. I'm sure for like every Amazon there is today, there's probably like 1,000 startups who are trying to do
Yes.
like something of the sort, which is to sell things like online maybe, and their goal was probably to get bought out by Walmart. And
Mm.
so I think that like today, there are definitely startups that will end up becoming super big, but they have to do something innovative. They can't just be copying everyone else um, and then end up super big. For example, we don't have any like huge like company related to blockchain or like
Mm.
cryptocurrencies. I think like when those get super big, there's going to be companies as big as Google, as big as Amazon, as big
Oh.
as Tesla, just centered around, for example, blockchain or
Hmm.
crypto,
So
centralized
okay.
stuff.
So there's the startup culture has not died. It's perhaps we just know the successful ones, and those are the ones we remember or
Mm-hmm.
haven't noticed yet. Interesting. I want to kind of pivot a bit to this topic of large enterprises, free enterprise capitalism, and the situation with our world today. So we're both Asian Americans, and
Mm-hmm.
so recently I think the U.S. has taken a more combative stance towards China. Like I feel like maybe when we were younger, it was more of a competitive, right? We have to compete with China, and hopefully they play by the rules, right? Or like I don't know if it's minimum wage or whatever fair rules we play by, right? But
Mm-hmm.
now I feel it's become, instead of competing, it's more, I guess we're shifting towards a more militaristic approach, right? And then I don't know if you remember the article I sent you on the U.S. general that retired or resigned from the United States, like I think some artificial intelligence program, and he said that like China has already won,
Mm-hmm.
right? This race, and we always thought of China kind of like we're better because we have freedom, right? We have
Mm-hmm.
capitalism, things like that. But it's interesting in the podcast that I said we might have more freedom, but China had freer, I guess, markets or room for this type of innovation to occur. If you think of all the kind of constraints we want to put on big companies right now, or minimum wage, things like that, to help the worker. But I guess it's more like government intervention to get a certain result. Are we less free than China economically in a certain sense? And does the type of system, I guess, or society you live in matter for this type of innovation?
Hmm. Yeah, it's definitely a lot to unpack there.
Yep.
um, I would say I'll first skip the economic freedom part for now. I might
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
throw a question back at you at the end
Sure.
because I think I don't have enough knowledge on China's economy versus the US economy to answer that. I think I can talk a little bit about innovation and AI and the professor who said that China has already won the AI race.
Mm,
And I think it's not that they've won the AI race. I think what it is that their pace of discovery is currently outpacing us. Like we
hmm.
still, we had a head start over China. If you think back, maybe like 20, 30 years ago, US was definitely a superpower
Right.
already, had like a bunch of established and well-known universities, was like publishing research, cutting edge research, in fact, at a pretty fast pace.
Right.
And now, of course, it's we're still going at a relatively fast pace, but just due to the extremely rapid development of China, all they're kind of following in um, the footsteps of the U.S., at least in terms of development. At least like now they have like their big cities, they have their own universities publishing a lot of research, and I think in terms of that, um, they're developing at a really really fast pace, and
Mm,
their pace of development is what's causing them to at least catch up in this race. And if they catch up, because their velocity you can think of is currently faster right now. We're ahead, but their
Right.
velocity is faster. And so when they catch up, that means they're going to outpace us. They're going to be ahead of us. But I don't actually believe that they've caught up to us just yet.
I see. So this is the article that I just found it while you were talking, and it's former Pentagon official says China has won artificial intelligence battle. And his phrase is, we have no competing fighting chance against China in 15 to 20 years. Right now, it's already a done deal. Again, I think it's hard to deny that China is catching up. I guess the argument is, has China overtaken us? And you don't think that China has. But why do you think it is that China has been able to catch up to us versus us gaining more ground to pull ahead?
I think it's largely due to the fact that it's nothing on our side. I think we're kind of our
Oh, I
society
think
has
it's
stayed
everything
relatively.
on our
You think it's
side.
everything?
Interesting.
I guess we can talk about that after also. I think
Yeah, yeah.
in my opinion, it's that like our side has stayed relatively the same. Like our US like
Mm,
education has never been like super top notch, but we've always
mm.
had some bright researchers, some people who are able to push the current boundary
Yes.
of research. But I think with China is that like they never actually had that opportunity like 20, 30 years ago. There are very
Mm,
few people who are able to go to college. There's a
right.
lot of like problems just with surviving. But now actually with like technology becoming a lot more advanced, actually like the people who have to focus on just getting food and surviving is a lot less. Like people
Yes.
actually have like more free time to focus on their education, and as such a lot more Chinese students are able to get a good education, and that combined with the fact that I believe like education is definitely more valued in China
Mm,
than it is in the US. I feel like in the US, like we don't actually value education that strongly, and it's
mm.
a lot of like, oh, if I fail, whatever,
Find your own path. Yeah.
find your own path, that type of
Right,
thing.
right.
I think that's a very big cultural difference. So
Mm,
that factor combined with the factor that like uh, China is giving a lot more opportunity to its citizens now is the driving force behind the China starting to overtake us.
I see. I guess I'll tell you why I think it's our fault rather than China's mm, push or new developments with China that's led them to overtake us. I think it's twofold with us. One is I think we've developed a fear of AI technology. We have all these like even before it's occurring now, we have like governments trying to regulate, right? What goes on. I think they were talking about Proposition 237 or something. They wanted to regulate certain things that go on the social media sites. And
Mhm,
so if with regulation, I think there's less innovation. And
mhm,
so it stifles any like thing you can done. Because if there's so many rules, eventually you just choke the life out of doing better because you're so focused on following or maintaining the rules that there's no chance for our scientists or innovators to break through and do something new. I think that's the thing with AI. There's a fear of it, and thus leads to regulation and then the stagnation of the field.
So
Yeah.
actually, I'm actually very interested in that. So why do you think AI is feared? I think that's an interesting word to use. So what do you
So
think causes that?
you
And
see what we put ourselves as a foil to China. Like you know how China, I think with the Muslims in the West,
mhm,
right? I think they're developing surveillance technology using AI
mhm,
to do that to keep track of their citizens, right? I think they have this social credit game or something, right? If you're a good citizen, you get a higher social score or something. I
mhm.
think that has to do a little bit with that has to use some type of AI algorithm. I think about who you're interacting with and their facial recognition technology, right? And so you ask an average American, what do you think of that? They're like, oh, that invades my privacy.
Mm.
You know what I mean? That's off limits to the government. The government shouldn't be able to do this, whatnot. Like, and so then we elect representatives or people who we'll keep this right to privacy, but because government, I don't think is a very specific instrument, right? It's very blatant, like blunt force. And so it's like, all right, no facial recognition technology. And so great, you just killed the facial recognition technology of like the next generation. You know, versus China, they don't care. You know what I mean? They don't have these moral rules about privacy and whatnot. You know, their government has all the power, so they could do whatever the heck they want. Plus, it actually they would get the innovators to do this. You know what I mean? It's like the government encourages people to develop facial recognition technology because that's what a tool the government can use to further, I guess, cement its control. I think that's where the fear comes from.
So then, do you think this fear is valid? And I ask this because
Oh, yeah,
I believe that the technology already exists. Like we already, like surveillance is easy, right? Surveillance is just like cameras, and that's been around for
right.
forever. And then facial recognition, actually facial recognition is getting to a really, really, really high degree of accuracy as well. And so essentially, we don't actually have to discover like any new techniques or any cutting edge AI algorithms in order to implement this type of like dystopian world where like everyone is being like
Surveilled, yeah, something
surveilled,
like.
if that's a word. And so like, do you think that like that's actually due to the development of AI, or do you think that's kind of like a scapegoat and it's like an invalid like reason?
Hmm. I want to say both, but that doesn't quite make sense. So the reason I want to say both is because on one hand, AI is used as scapegoat because I don't think we fully understand it. I don't even fully understand it. Right. So it's easy just to say, oh, it's AI causing, it's like the Terminator or something. People just jump to simple conclusions. We have a country that believes like QAnon and whatnot. So like, I mean, it's easy to jump into conspiracy, I guess, and then conspiracy theories are like just to point at AI and just say that's bad. You know what I mean? People don't look into what exactly it is. And but I also think that they're trying to find a scapegoat, but also with the wrong hands, you can do not so good stuff with AI. And who can defend me from that? I guess if I allow it, I guess this is me speaking for like people. It's like if I allow it, then can I put a stop to it? Because once private, usually like when privacy, you give it up, it doesn't come back. That's a trend with privacy. And so I think with regard to the overlap with privacy, that's what in the wrong hands it could be used wrongly. But I do definitely think there's some scapegoating. Like even I feel maybe I myself am scapegoating AI. Maybe it's very neutral. Like it's just people who use it wrongly or for wrong reasons. They can give a bad rap to it.
That's
What
what I
about
think.
you? What do you think? Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly what I think also. I think that like AI itself is extremely neutral. And then when you talk about like invasion of privacy or the government trying to peep into everything that we're doing, they actually like it doesn't take a whole lot of AI in order to do that. It takes like very like minimalistic knowledge to kind of like install cameras everywhere
I
and
don't
then
even
have
think you
like
need to do that. I think we naturally give up stuff through social media. That the
yeah,
government doesn't even need to find it. Oh,
or
what did
that,
you
or
eat
you
for
have
dinner
like
today? And
yeah,
people
or
are already taking pictures.
just like just monitor like just have like some bot to monitor like everyone's social media and what everyone
Posts,
posts
yeah,
and monitor us
their
that way.
location.
So I believe that like that's why I think like AI is a scapegoat, because
Mm,
I don't actually think it is AI which enables that invasion of privacy. It's that like if the government wants to do that, then they have the capability to do that even without doing a ton of research into AI. So I think AI itself is definitely neutral,
neutral.
is kind of independent from this concept of the government being a little bit overly nosy.
I see. Huh. So AI itself is neutral, but I guess wrong hands, it could lead to bad consequences. Um, With respect to China, though, I guess this goes more into different social structures, I guess. US, we tend to emphasize more like freedom, and privacy, things like that. China, whereas I feel China doesn't, the voice of caring is more dormant right now or
Mhm.
suppressed. And so it's more like it has more, it's in a way it's freer to move in this aspect than in the US. But I guess they have to learn certain things from us, or are there any stopgap technologies that China needs from the US before they can implement certain, um, I guess, of these AI technologies or technologies in general that without the US they can't do?
I don't think so. I think due to the prevalence of the internet, everything's already
Mm,
out there. Like there's nothing that you would need from the US specifically. And I guess when I say the US, I'm thinking like, oh, maybe like research from like
mm,
MIT or Princeton or these top
right.
universities. I don't think like that is anything special. And what's online, like there's like a ton of information online, and just using that, like people can get very, very, very far in
I
not only
see.
replicating the current cutting edge technologies, but also coming up with their own.
Because I think I think I read an article somewhere where Trump administration was investigating like stealing of research or something by like Chinese graduate students or whatnot at universities. And then because, in our social justice culture, that's like anti-Asian like hate or whatnot, right? So we kind of like we protect these students who are coming to the US, international students, protect them from, I guess, government saying that they're stealing research. But I don't know if they actually take advantage of that, they
Y-
could be stealing research in a way,
You
right?
know, you know exactly what I think about this. I
What
want
do
to
you
be
think
like
about
super,
this?
super blunt. I
We might
feel
get
like
canceled, by the way. So
the term, I also heard this, the term stealing intellectual property, I feel
mm,
like is the most elitist thing that somebody could say. It's that like, oh, you're going to Cornell, oh man, stop stealing our intellectual property. Because I
uh,
think the truth of the matter is everyone wants the degree. You
mm,
want the degree, you want that piece of paper, you want the name. The
mm,
intellectual property is already out there. Literally, there's
mm,
so many free courses, MIT Open Courseware. It's like free MIT lectures. They are at least like the quality of those lectures is definitely at least as good as lectures that you get at any other
mm.
university. It's all out there. I don't think like
You can't
students are
steal
coming in.
knowledge.
Yeah, I don't think students are
Knowledge is
coming
owned
in.
by you,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. And like students, it's not like I'm like, yes, I was accepted to Harvard. I get to
I get to
take as
steal this,
much
take
intellectual property as possible. It's like
right,
a
and take this back
buffet.
to the motherland, right? Yeah,
Take all this intellectual property, all this research, let's hoard as much as we can in our four
yeah,
years here, and
right,
then take
right.
it back. It's like
And improve China, yeah.
you're there for the degree. Like no one's if you're gonna pay like that much money and they tell you you get like as much intellectual property as you want, but you don't get the degree, nobody's gonna take that offer.
Right,
You're like
right,
80% there for the degree, and it's like harsh, but I think that's a reality. Like you obviously want to learn, but like
right,
the
right.
term like stealing as if you're like, oh, I'm in here and I can get as much as possible, I think that's like just not
Mm.
the proper way to view it.
Then I
Mhm.
also think historical examples like Japan, right? They felt like they saw China get wrecked by the Opium War in the Opium Wars against Britain because Britain
Mhm.
had superior technology, right? So Japan had like this epiphany that we need to catch up, and so they hired like Americans or European teachers to come teach at Japan. They sent their students to other nations to learn, and I guess you can't say that again. Let's like, you're convincing me that it's not intellectual stealing or whatnot. It's they just really want to learn, right? They come back and they use that what they learned and the technology to better their own nation, right? Can you say that's stealing? I guess not really. It's like hey, you earned it, right? And
It's like,
right.
it's
So
like, yeah, you on the one hand want to know more yourself. On the other hand, you want to improve your own life. Like education is like
yeah,
key in today's world. It's like
right.
if you don't have education, then like your whole future is just less bright, and therefore like it's
You have less paths to
definitely
take.
yeah, it's definitely I don't think that like people are going into universities with the thought of like trying it's not like they're trying to take as much as possible. They are trying to take as much as possible, but like I don't think anyone conceptualizes it that way.
Okay. I guess for this podcast, we'll end here on this note of AI, intellectual property. And yeah. Alan, do you have any last things you want to say?
Not much. Yeah, just thanks for having this podcast, and I hope that our listeners can take away something and steal as much of our intellectual property as possible.